Hey everybody, welcome to the Eternal Card Breakdown. My name is M, and we have a new promo card today. It's a big dinosaur. It's not from the Valley Beyond. This one's free to everyone. So, hey kids, you want to buy a dinosaur? First one's free. All you got to do is play your standard versus matches, and you'll get one copy of this every day for the next 4 days, or it'll be a full week of this event where you can just pick yourself up a big old dinosaur. And boy, this is a big old dinosaur. This is Slumbering Range. It's a 5 cost 0/10 for 5 time influence that has 10 strength if you gained health this turn, and also says that your units cannot die while you have 35 health or more. Couple of relevant abilities, a very cheap cost, and notably, when everything is going swimmingly, it's a 10/10 for 5, which means that this card is going to be bigger and nastier than anything else on the board whenever it is that you have actually gained life during the turn. Now, of course, this turns off on your opponent's turn, so you'll have to gain health during your opponent's turn to give it the extra bonus that way, but that opens up rooms for fast spell tricks, weird little shenanigans, anything that actually allows you to deal damage with lifesteal or gain health in some way can activate Slumbering Range at times when your opponents might not expect it. If you want to attack with the card because it has 0 attack, you aren't going to be able to use it as a trick, but if you want to defend with the card, you can typically trade with just about anything else that your opponent has, just by gaining a little life or throwing like a big ol' lifesteal trick out there. It's pretty sweet stuff. Now, as to the disadvantages, the card is, of course, a little inflexible. It's not always going to be able to attack as a 10/10. It doesn't have Overwhelm or any abilities that allow it to provide reach, give you health, do anything that will actually, like, influence the state of the game towards victory beyond just being an excellent wall and trading really well for advantage. So this card is not necessarily the way that you win the game, but it is definitely the way that you start getting there. However, if you can get this thing like some flying or some Overwhelm or some unblockable, for example. There's a lot of different ways that you can make this thing into a very, very short clock for your opponent that will be just allow them to get crushed under a mountain range. It's pretty sweet stuff. Yeah, so for a dinosaur, pretty interesting times. I really like the concept of using it as a trick. I think it works particularly well in the Xenon archetype where you are playing with like a decent amount of removal, where you have the ability to give the card unblockable if you want to as like just kind of a side bonus, where you have access to a lot of lifesteal tricks that can often be fast, and where you have just a lot of different ways to sort of make Slumbering Range into more of a problem. That being said, I think it plays well in any splash color except that it has that 5-time influence, which means that mono time is the place where you're most likely to slot a card like this. And if you are mono time, there's very few reasons. If you are mono time and you have health gain, there's very few reasons not to put this card in the 5 slot because it's just an enormous monster. Yeah, so it does some really interesting things. I think it's overall like kind of on balance, despite being a 10/10 for 5. While the card will trade well with just about everything, time is generally going to have bigger units than your opponent on turn 5 and turn 4 and turn 3, and basically any turn normally. And if you are playing only in time, this card isn't adding anything to that particular strategy. You're still just playing a big unit every turn. You now have to gain some health to actually make the unit bigger, and that means that you're playing less cards that are going to give you the flexibility and reach to push across for the victory. You simply have to outvalue your opponent if you're playing Slumbering Range, or go for something really, really bonkers. But because the card is such a good defender, and because the card is just so big, it's really hard to kill. There's just nothing that a red deck can do about this, for example. Like, you can't obliterate this, you can't throw any number of torches and other damage spells at it. There are very few ways to actually deal enough damage to Slumbering Range to kill it. And because the card synergizes with life gain, this means that it's just a solid blockade that makes red decks very, very sad. With blue decks, you know, they're going to fly right over it. With other stuff like that, there's definitely going to be a little bit less interaction with it and more just moving around it, killing it, permafrosting it, basically anything that'll allow you to sort of mess it up. But this is a card that actually resists Ice Bolt and a number of other cards that like also function for that type of range, and that's not something that you usually see on a 5-drop, so that's pretty interesting to note. I think that overall the card has some pretty wild stuff going on, and that's not to mention the final little bonus there, which is that your units can't die when you have 35 health or more. If you are actually getting to that particular health total, the ability of your units to just be unable to die triggers a number of different like interesting combos. You can do some weird twist infinite combos with that, and like some other wild stuff. Indifference has always been like kind of a thing where you can actually make some unusual stuff happen. But also, like on cards like Queen of Glass, we've seen how effective this is at basically just making the board into a completely untenable situation for your opponents. Because when you're attacking with one big monster that has to be chump blocked every turn, it's usually not a problem. When you're attacking with multiple big monsters that have to be chump blocked every turn and they can't be killed in any type of trade, that will get your opponent out of the game very, very quickly. So putting yourself up to just 35 health, which is not the hardest thing to do when you have a 0-10 wall in play, is something that can actually be really, really reasonable and can potentially get you a victory through that particular means. I still don't think that Slumbering main range is the main piece of whatever deck strategy that you have going on, and that is like its primary weakness is that it is just not a card that you use to win the game or a card that you use to define your specific plan. But it is a card that if you have a specific plan that involves a lot of time influence and a lot of life gain, is a pretty clear slot in, and that's what we think of it. I think a 10-10 for 5 is an incredibly efficient unit, so as long as you're playing with the lifesteal archetype, this is something that gives you a really, really good top end, a really, really good stat line for its particular value, and the main disadvantages are that there's just not going to be that many decks that you want to put this in because of the really, really steep influence cost and the requirement of gaining health to make that advantage happen. But you can pull some amazing tricks with it, and anytime that you're gaining life, you have a 10-10 dinosaur, and you're feeling pretty good about your life. So that's our thoughts on Slumbering Range. Thanks so much for watching. You can find this, of course, in the Eternal Card Game client, and you can find us on Twitch TV/LocoPojo. See you all later, and have a good one. Cheers.